The 4-day Democratic National Convention comes to a close, with Joe Biden making it up the basement stairs for the first time in months. Kamala Harris ignores the elephant in the room, alt-right agitators clash with Antifa in Portland, and the universities across the country overreact to the surprise of no one. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of my podcast. I'm Adam Mahler. If you're watching this show live, feel free to follow me on Twitch or DLive, where I stream every Sunday at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, please subscribe or donate to help improve the show. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe for a weekly update on the current political news. It's free, and if you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. Now, onto the news. Last week, Joe Biden gave his acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention. He only needed to succeed in two areas at this convention, which were to 1. Show the nation that he is still alive, and 2. To not run to appease the far left too much. In both areas, he appeared to succeed. However, there are a few points from his speech I'd like to discuss. First off is the talking points Democrats have been getting at for months now, that the economy is in shambles because of Trump. And here is clip 1.
5 million Americans infected by COVID-19. More than 170,000 Americans have died. By far the worst performance of any nation on earth. More than 50 million people have filed for unemployment this year. More than 10 million people are going to lose their health insurance this year. Nearly 1 in 6 small businesses have closed this year. And this president, if he's reelected, you know what will happen. Cases and deaths will remain far too high. More mom and pop businesses will close their doors, and this time for good. Working families will struggle to get by. And yet the wealthiest 1% will get tens of billions of dollars in new tax breaks.
So there's a few issues with him blaming Trump for the state of the economy. A large portion of the economy is still shut down. How does Biden think he's going to fix the economy when the governor of New York refuses to open his state despite having been averaging fewer than 10 case deaths a day since early July? Effectively, Joe Biden is playing this game where he's ignoring COVID to attack Trump on the economy, and then, as we'll see, he turns around to attack him for not instituting things such as a national mask mandate, which has, to say the least, questionable constitutional grounds for the president to do that. Biden then goes on to say what a lot of Democrats have been saying out loud since 2016, which is that Trump is not a legitimate president. And here's clip 2 on that.
And speaking of President Obama, a man I was honored to serve alongside for 8 years as vice president, let me take this moment to say something we don't say nearly enough. Thank you, Mr. President. You were a great president, a president our children could and did look up to. No one's going to say that about the current occupant of the White House. What we know about this president is if he's given 4 more years, he'll be what he's been for the last.
The occupant of the White House? This is what many Democrats have been saying for years, with the "not my president" and the Russian collusion narrative being focused on the idea that even though Trump holds the title, he is an illegitimate president. And this is a pretty big thing because I personally think that we're going to see here the grounds being set for if Trump wins, he's still illegitimate, but if he loses, then he loses. So we're going to play this game for another 4 years if Trump wins, or if we elect Biden, we can all just stop. That's the magical game we're playing here. Anyway, I'd like to get to the next piece, which has to deal with Biden's plans for dealing with COVID-19. And just 1 second.
The president still does not have a plan. Well, I do. If I'm your president, on day one, we'll implement the national strategy I've been laying out since March. We'll develop and deploy rapid tests with results available immediately. We'll make the medical supplies and protective equipment that our country needs. And we'll make them here in America, so we will never again be at the mercy of China or other foreign countries in order to protect our own people. Votes? It's about...
So, your plan is Trump's plan? We've been expanding rapid testing faster than any other nation. We've been producing more protective equipment in the U.S. than ever before, so your plan is to continue what Trump is doing, but suggest it's not being done. This is asinine suggestions from the Democrats that Trump is doing nothing. If Trump does something, it's wrong. If Trump does nothing, it's wrong. They're trying to put him in a double bind here. I don't think it's going to work. And on top of this, again, we have this national mask mandate that Biden keeps talking about. Again, where there's no constitutional grounds for that. In fact, this is despite the fact that there's no clear evidence that a national mask mandate would help anyone. On July 29th, the Netherlands refused to issue a mask mandate stating, because from a medical perspective there is no proven effectiveness to masks, the cabinet has decided that there will be no national obligation for wearing non-medical masks, according to Van Ark. By the way, Van Ark is the Dutch Minister for Medical Care. So if the Dutch Minister for Medical Care is saying there's no scientific evidence suggesting one would work, the Surgeon General came out very early and said that that masks don't work. Why are we getting the suggestion of a national mask mandate? That's the question that I would like to have answered here. So, moving on very quickly, the next point is one that I think is more of an issue for me personally as a college student. And anyway, Joe Biden goes and calls Social Security a sacred promise.
And for our seniors, Social Security is a sacred obligation, a sacred promise made. They paid for. The current president is threatening to break that promise. He's proposing to eliminate a tax that pays for almost half the Social Security without any way of making up for that lost revenue, resulting in cuts. I will not let that happen. If I'm your president, we're going to protect Social Security and Medicare. You have my word. One of the most powerful voices we hear in the country today is from our young people. They're speaking to the...
So I do hope that Joe Biden doesn't plan on protecting security the way that he's been doing it in the past. I mean, let's make a couple things clear here. Social Security is a pyramid scheme for one. The people, young people in the bottom pay in, and old people at the top receive. And the hope is that there are enough young people to support the old people. It's a pyramid scheme. It's a scam for all intents and purposes. And there's no evidence that for someone like me, a person under the age of 30, that there is ever going to be a payout for Social Security. This is a promise that has no funding. It's completely funded at this part pretty much entirely by the payroll tax, and what's not funded by that is paid for by the Federal Reserve through bonds. I don't know how he says, oh, I'm going to protect it, when he hasn't been doing anything to protect it since he got his job as a senator. And I don't really know where to go with this, except that it's just straight up a lie. I mean, the most he's going to do, get rid of the payroll tax suspension that's currently going on. that's helping people save thousands of dollars in the middle of a pandemic, Joe Biden wants to implement nearly $1 trillion in new taxes to the American people. His plan is $1 trillion in new taxes, and he's sitting there saying that we're breaking promises in the middle of a pandemic. $1 trillion in new taxes. $1 trillion isn't even going to save Social Security, let alone the hundreds of other failing government programs out there that are debt funded at this point. Anyway, moving quickly on, the last thing I'd like to get to is Biden talking about election interference. Again, the Democrats have been playing this game the entire time where they delegitimize Trump and basically go out and say that he's not a legitimate president, and that if he wins this election, then it's not a legitimate win, and he still won't be a legitimate president. It's the "not my president" group. Anyway, here's Joe Biden talking about Donald Trump not being your president.
Under President Biden, America will not turn a blind eye to Russian bounties on the heads of American soldiers. Nor will I put up with foreign interference in our most sacred democratic exercise, voting. And I'll always stand for our values of human rights and dignity. I'll work in common purpose for a more secure, peaceful, and
So, one second. Okay. So here we have Biden playing up the National Security Report, saying that Russians were planning to interfere in the election on the behalf of Trump. Obviously, Trump hasn't had any contact with them about this, at least none that's been shown. But in the same report, they talk about how both China and Iran are planning on interfering to help Biden, because Biden's gonna go soft on them. For all his talk in this speech about not cozying up to dictators, I remember when Joe Biden was vice president, how he was praising the Iran deal, which gave them 10 years and then they could build nuclear weapons, as well as giving them millions of dollars, which they immediately turned around and used to fund terrorist organizations in the Middle East, many of which attacked United States soldiers. So I don't know what kind of ground Joe Biden's trying to stand on here, but it doesn't work. And let's talk about China for a second. China is easily arguable as the United States' #1 geopolitical rival. And election interference is bad for us in all areas, but China has the most to gain from Trump losing at this point. Russia just wants chaos, as far as I can tell. Trump has not gone soft on Russia since he was elected. China wants to get these trade restrictions lifted. They want Trump to stop going hard. They don't want him in office because he's sanctioning their people for doing terrible things. Joe Biden doesn't want to take that hard stance on them. Now, aside from all this, I do have to reiterate that overall, it was a good speech from Joe Biden. He hit all the high notes he needed to while casting the dark undertones at Trump as he should. It's a political speech. It's what he's supposed to do, and I don't expect that much less from it. But I just thought that these were some pretty serious things that should probably be addressed, really. And so, as I said before, Joe Biden only needs to look like he's alive and not run too far to the left. In this, he succeeded, well, making basically no gaffes during his speech, which is surprising considering the number of gaffes Joe Biden's been making over the course of this campaign. It was well-rounded, patriotic, and definitely an American speech. I particularly like the part in the speech where he does reference the Declaration of Independence as a founding document and as the ideals that we should all aspire to look up to. That is something that I think really needs to be restated nowadays. Trump is going to have to do a lot better at the Republican National Convention this week, which I'll cover in my next episode, obviously. This week, Trump will need to show that Biden is essentially controlled by the party and that the policies he claims he will implement will probably look radically different if he makes it into office. We've seen this where he ran moderate in the primary, and now that he's in the general election, he's running to the left. He picked Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris had by far some of the largest spending proposals and some of the most radically far left ideas out there. She said that if Congress did not act within 100 days of her becoming president, that she would institute an executive order on gun control, which is unconstitutional. She proposed trillions of dollars in healthcare and social welfare spending. It is not unreasonable to believe that Joe Biden will be influenced by her. So, as long as Trump can do this, the only other thing he needs to do is convince people to vote for him, despite the obvious fact that he's Donald Trump and he's unable to stay off Twitter for longer than a day. I swear to God, if Trump would stop tweeting, then he would have a much closer race, because most people are not voting for Joe Biden because they like Joe Biden or because they think he's an enthusiastic candidate. They're voting for Joe Biden because Joe Biden is practically dead. He just needs to look a little bit alive to win this election and not sound too crazy. Other than that, people would prefer a dead man over Donald Trump for the most part. And that's what he's going to have to focus on in the election. Moving on to the next thing from this week. As you all likely know by now, Joe Biden selected former California Attorney General and Senator Kamala Harris to be his running mate. This is despite the fact that she called him an old racist pedophile in the past. And, well, she gave her speech on Thursday, and it went about as well as you'd expect for a campaign speech. After launching into her speech with a good section about family and growing up in the United States, she begins to talk about her public service. And that's where I will bring us to our next clip.
Virus touches us all. We got to be honest. It is not an equal opportunity offender. Black, Latino, and Indigenous people are suffering and dying disproportionately. And this is not a coincidence. It is the effect of structural racism, of inequities in education and technology, healthcare and housing, job security and transportation. The injustice.
So, yes, the virus does disproportionately affect these groups, but I fail to see how some obscure structural racism is causing these deaths. I want to see the policy that says these people can't get treatment for COVID, or how they're disadvantaged in such a way, to my best discernment, in how they're disadvantaged in any such way. To my best discernment, the main reason it disproportionately affects these groups is they tend to, on average, live in cities more than white Americans. And that's just a general fact. The virus spreads faster in cities, and thus it affects them more. More of these groups die, and it's very sad to see people die. It should never be thought of as a good thing in any way. I don't care who you are. I don't even know why I'm saying this. It should be that obvious. But I don't see how structural racism could even be the cause of this in any such way. So, the other part is... Right, and the other part we have here.
To believe public service is a noble cause, and the fight for justice is a shared responsibility. That led me to become a lawyer, a district attorney, attorney general, and a United States senator. And at every step of the way, I've been guided by the words I spoke from the first time I stood in a courtroom. Kamala Harris, for the people. I have fought for children and survivors of sexual assault. I fought against transnational criminal organizations. I took on the biggest banks and helped take down one of the biggest for-profit colleges. I know a predator when I see one.
Really, Kamala? Do you really? Have you met your running mate? I remember the primaries where you took this exact line of attack at Joe Biden. So, what changed? Is it the fact that you're an opportunist? Anyway, aside from that, I do like how she brings up her time as a prosecutor. She talks about some really vile criminals out here, but pretty conveniently leaves out how she, threatened parents with jail time for truancy and locked up 1,600 nonviolent marijuana violators. And, then she went and joked about smoking pot on live TV. But, it's pretty cool, don't you think? So, the rest of her speech, after all that, is pretty normal vice president stumping for Joe Biden, promoting her policies. So, in the end, it's a normal convention speech. And I don't know how much else to say on that, really. So I'll just move on to the next topic. So as you can see here, we have Portland police stand by as Proud Boys and far-right militias flash guns and brawl with Antifa counter-protesters. So, this Saturday, a bunch of alt-right bullies basically decided to show up in Portland and cause trouble. To anyone who hasn't seen the news, there's been rolling riots in Portland, which could of course only be described as mostly peaceful by some in the media. Well, the alt-right showed up, and pretty much immediately violence broke out. Now, let's be clear. Both groups here showed up looking for a fight. The alt-right brought bats and a whole host of other weapons, including fireworks and even a few guns, although it's unclear if any were used, to my knowledge. Both sides actually brought fireworks and shields as well, and Antifa brought bottles filled with chemical solutions, as well as other bats and just anything you can whack someone over the head with, clearly. So where were the police? Well, they stayed away and simply asked the clearly violent mob to watch out for criminal activity. Rather ironically. They were telling the crowds to self-monitor for criminal activity, even as people beat each other with sticks and people were brandishing handguns. Someone was hit in the chest with a firework. And the reasoning for why they didn't interfere, well, each side appeared to involve willing participants. And why didn't they intervene at all as well? Well, the nightly riots, according to the police station, have basically left officers exhausted. If I could bring that up quickly. So police said they did not stop the violence, although the event met the criteria to be declared a riot because too few officers were available to respond and they deemed it too dangerous to intervene. Officers were tired from responding to a much smaller and less volatile protest that was declared a riot the night before, the Bureau said in a statement. And incident commanders also had concerns that the officers would be targeted by the crowd. It's been going on for 80 days now. Portland Police Bureau members have been the focus of over 80 days of violent actions directed at the police, which is a major consideration for determining if police resources are necessary to interject between two groups. So, 80 days of protests, and what happens when two violent groups come to pretty serious blows? All of a sudden, the police can't respond because you're tying up all the resources. And again, these are being called mostly peaceful protests. They are so mostly peaceful that the police officers are too exhausted to deal with any major daytime threats to the public. This isn't good. The Portland Police Bureau has struggled to quell confrontations between far-right groups and anti-fascists in the city since 2017. Well, no surprise there. It's also no surprise that this has happened because the defund the police movement has left them without the ability to use tear gas for crowd control, ultimately making the situation too dangerous. Portland, as some of you probably know, late last month, really, banned the use of tear gas against protesters. These are the situations which you use tear gas for, to disperse these kinds of crowds and keep them from beating the living snot out of each other. Anyway, for the final topic, the universities across the country have been, well, to the surprise of nobody again, overreacting to the coronavirus pandemic. Many people have been wondering how the pandemic is going to affect colleges and how well they will deal with the college experience in the times of COVID. Well, the response by most colleges seems to be, well, let's just take all these extremely social people who are experiencing more responsibility and freedom than they have in their lives and just tell them how to control most aspects of their lives. The result? Not so good. Despite many campuses having extremely detailed roadmaps, many are finding it hard, if not impossible, to survive the first weeks because, well, college students are college students. What more do you have to say? And truthfully, what did they really expect? Everyone to come back and nobody does anything in their free time? So I'm a college student and I can definitively say it's not fun. It's not something I necessarily enjoy doing, sitting in my apartment here just doing nothing for most of the day. Although I guess it's good for you guys because it basically got me to start this podcast. So, in response, some universities have been effectively trying to send students home, which just, what the hell, guys? You're taking the least at-risk population in the world and sending them home. Now, quickly, to the credit of the universities, none have actually forcefully sent anyone home, but many are moving to remote learning despite the evidence showing that the virus isn't spreading in the classroom. They're also quarantining dorms, and if you're a student in a dorm and all of your classes are remote, what are you going to do? You're probably going back home unless you really think the campus is opening. You're probably going home. So my question again is pretty simple. What did they think was going to happen? Many schools are employing contact tracers, which is essentially just going through the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon here to figure out who's infected. The solution should be to allow students on campus knowing there will be outbreaks, but to advise against the large gatherings and effectuating quarantines where necessary. They should keep students on campus and allow it to build an immunity. This is a very unpopular opinion, and it's sad. This thing is less dangerous than the flu for people among the younger age group, specifically my age group. And if you could build this immunity in our groups, then when we go home, or when college students in general go home, they don't actually have a risk of taking the virus home to their family and grandparents, who are at much higher risks. So if we look at this article from the New York Times here, college trouble spots, parties and fraternities. College trouble spots, parties and fraternities. Doesn't say anything. The Times linked at least 251 cases to fraternities and sororities across the country, including Washington, North Carolina, Berkeley, California, and Oxford, Missouri. Last weekend at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, bars and sidewalks were crowded with sorority members and the students reveling in their return to school rituals, sparking the fury of university officials. Quote, the basic features of daily life in sororities and fraternities supersize the risk of spreading the virus, our colleague Amy Harmon told us. What did they expect? Did they seriously expect everyone to just return to campus and everything be fine? I think that the schools maybe need to reevaluate the priorities to a level where maybe they should just let students do what students do, protect their staff, because I can see the concerns in needing to protect their staff, but it takes up far fewer resources to protect your staff members than to protect the tens of thousands of college students on a single campus. And that allows you to do a lot more and allow college students to learn the world. Most people are taking care of themselves. From firsthand experience, anytime I go to a restaurant or I go out in public, I wear a mask. So if people want to make a decision, they should have the ability to make those decisions. I'm not saying it should be completely free of consequence. If they're around someone who's infected, they should get tested. They should do a quarantine because the science is showing that that could work. They should wear a face mask so that even if, I know I said earlier that there's not a lot of evidence that they work, but despite that, you should still wear one. And doing that, maybe we can get this under control and we can keep students learning in a safe, if not slightly more effective way than we're trying to do right now. So anyway, thank you for watching. The show is self-produced, so be sure to follow my stream on Twitch or DLive and subscribe on YouTube. It costs nothing and you can always unsubscribe if you don't like the content. If you really enjoy the content, feel free to donate or subscribe on Twitch. My show streams live on Sundays at 2 o'clock and uploads all streams to YouTube. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.